Okay. Sorry ya, saya terlupa ingatkan automatic that it will be recorded. Okay, I need to minimize certain things. Sekejap. Let me close this for a while. Sekejap. Ada banyak file that one is hilang. We close this one. Close another one. Too many file, dia tak mau. Okay. All right. Back to our lecture. As I said, I have forgotten to record the earlier segment of our class. My apologies, but just to recap what we've gone through in the last 1 hour or so, we've been looking at the factor of growth, economic growth, the three main factors based on Solo's model of economic growth. The first major factor is capital, capital, physical capital, which include money, finance, the other physical capital, machines, buildings, roads, and so on. Yeah. Then the other factor of growth is labor ataupun labor lah, basically labor, tenaga pekerja. Okay, but the tenaga pekerja saja tak cukup lah. Dia kena lah ada quality, skills, kemahiran bagi tenaga pekerja untuk meningkatkan pengeluaran. The third important factor of growth is technology. Tadi we've seen, the third very important factor of growth is the use of technology. And the technology ini we have various types. The first one is known as the labor-saving technology. Labor-saving technology is the one technology which reduce the use of labor, but the increase in production is due to the use of the teknologi yang boleh menambahkan pengeluaran di dalam negara ataupun dalam industri dengan teknologi, dibantu teknologi tadi. Okay. The second one is capital saving technology. Capital saving technology maknanya menjimatkan capital lah, tapi you still can produce more goods. Ini dengan cost dengan menggunakan lebih ramai tenaga pekerja. So this kind of technological progress may be more appropriate for the less developed countries ataupun developing countries. Kerana apa? The first reason is because most of the developing countries are lacking in capital, kekurangan modal. The second reason is because most of the developing countries also have a large population. And one of the goals of economic development dalam keadaan itu adalah untuk membantu, to help reduce unemployment. In other words, to provide employment for the big population. Those are two main reasons why capital saving rather than labor saving technology is more appropriate for the less developed countries. Tapi bagi negara yang sudah maju, they emphasize more on the labor-saving technology, right? Labor-saving technology. Okay. Then I also talk about the labor augmenting technology and also capital augmenting technology. Yeah, last one. Okay, so all right, so we go to okay, those are some pictures that I've shown you earlier on the use technology in agriculture and industry, right? To help to increase the production. Really. Okay, so next is the human capital. So I just want to share with you the fact that in terms of labor tadi, kita dah bincang, labor is a very critical factor, one of factors of production. But as I said, labor alone, ya, tenaga pekerja saja ataupun the human body itself is not enough, ya, to help to increase production. You can increase production by increasing apa nama tu number of labor lah, boleh, ya. Tetapi if you can improve the quality of the workers, the quality of labor, that will help to increase production even further. Okay, so talking about human capital, right? So human capital, trying to get rid of this blocking my view. Okay, that's good. All right, so it can be classified as the economic value of a worker's experience and skill. Yeah, economic value. In other words, the additional output that a person can produce as a result of the experience, as a result of the skills. Yeah, so it's more than just labor. Yeah, lebih daripada labor. It's beyond that. Yeah. So this includes assets seperti education, training, intelligence, skills, even health ataupun kesihatan, and other things that employers value, such as loyalty and punctuality. Those are things tied to human capital. And this helps to increase production. Yeah. So this means that laborers become more skilled at what they're doing, at their craft, raising their productivity through skills training, through trial and error, or simply more practice. Yeah, those can have ways of improving human capital. Yeah. So the concept of human capital recognizes that not all labor is equal. Maksudnya mungkin di kalangan tenaga pekerja kita ada 10 orang, tetapi di kalangan 10 orang itu some are more skillful, some maybe have more experience, some maybe macam-macam lah dia punya abilities mungkin lain daripada yang lain, ya. So employers can improve the quality of the capital by investing in employees. Ya, dengan cara apa? Dengan mana? Provide education, send them for further training, ya, so that they gain experience. The abilities will improve, ya, so that abilities of employees all have economic value for employers and for the economy as a whole. Jadi itu how human capital contributes, ya. So human capital is important because it is perceived, to increase productivity and thus profitability. And by the way, can you see the slide?
Yes.
Boleh,
Yes, Prof.
Okay. Saya takut kamu tak nampak. Saya saja yang nampak. Okay, so human capital is important because it is perceived to increase productivity and therefore profitability lah bagi industri ataupun factory and so on, ya. So the more a company invests in its employees, through education, through training, the more productive and profitable it could be. Jadi satu justifikasi mengapa syarikat ataupun company continuously invest in its employees, hantar untuk training, bayar sekali, send them to certain places, ya, ataupun organize training program dengan tujuan, dengan harapan mereka itu akan menjadi lebih produktif. So if employees are more productive, they will be able to bring more benefit to the company. Alright. So, alright. So let's review back apa yang kita lihat berkenaan dengan economic growth tadi. Okay. So economic growth is an increase in the production of goods and services in an economy. Kalau tidak ada increase in goods and services, maka tidak adalah pertumbuhan ekonomi, ya, bagi negara tersebut. It could be negative, ya, but we want positive growth in our economy. So increases in capital goods, labor force, technology, and human capital can all contribute to economic growth. Ya, pertambahan dari segi modal, pertambahan dari segi labor force atau bilangan pekerja, teknologi, dan juga dari segi human capital, all contribute to economic growth. Jadi, if you analyze all this, and try to analyze country by country, mengapa sebuah negara lebih maju, lebih produktif, ataupun higher economic growth compared to another country, I think you can see the difference between those countries. Okay, sama ada perbezaan dari segi capital goods, sama ada perbezaan dari segi technology usage, ataupun perbezaan dari segi human capital, right? Ataupun just labor alone, so can be a difference. Yeah? So economic growth is commonly measured in terms of the increase in the aggregated market value, nilai pasaran, ya, of additional goods and services produced using estimate seperti GDP or GNP. Jadi dua cara, ya, untuk mengukur economic growth ni. GDP, gross domestic product, ataupun gross national product. Okay, so gross national product adalah, I think we have seen that earlier. Gross national product refers to the product which are produced or belong to the nation or by people of the country. GDP, gross domestic product ini, ianya tidak kisah company mana ke, luar negara ke, ataupun locally owned and so on, doesn't matter. Whatever is produced in the country or in the state or in the dalam satu distrik mukim ke apa ke kawasan, it becomes a gross domestic product. Everything produced in that region, that area is accounted for. Ya, tetapi GNP ini hanya melihat kepada the national, ya, tidak termasuk production ataupun goods produced by foreign companies, for example. Okay, jadi oleh kerana itu GDP is always higher than GNP lah, always higher GNP. Lebih-lebih lagi apabila sebuah negara, di dalam sebuah negara itu lebih banyak foreign owners, ya, tuan punya kilang, contohnya orang luar ataupun dengan foreigners, for example, maka GNP akan menjadi kecil, ya, because most of the income ataupun nilai-nilai tadi akan dibawa untuk keuntungan pelabur luar negara, sebagai contoh. Okay, so these are some of the questions for you to review the first part of our lecture content tadi, ya. For example, what are the 3 important factors of economic growth? Another question, assuming that developing country is engaging in process of planning for economic development in the country, what strategy should be taken to increase productivity in the agriculture sector? Okay. What type of technological progress is appropriate for most developing countries and why? Itu some of the guide ataupun soalan untuk for you to guides and perhaps to read more lah ya berkenaan dengan topik ataupun isu yang kita bincangkan pagi ini. Right, so move on to another the second segment of our lecture or second part of our lecture rather. And this is looking at the historical growth. Maksudnya apa yang telah berlaku ya telah dilalui oleh negara yang sudah maju berkenaan dengan pertumbuhan ekonomi ini. Right? Jadi one of which is the based on a study by Kuznets, Simon Kuznets, who has identified the six major characteristics of economic growth. Okay, all right. Just to recall a bit, quickly, economic growth today measured by the increase in country's total output or real GDP or GNP. Okay, so gross domestic product of a country is the total value of all final goods and services produced within a country over a period of time. Untuk jangka masa 1 tahun contohnya. Normally it's measured that way lah, so that we can measure growth in a year. And then, so therefore, an increase in GDP is the increase in the country's production equals to economic growth. That is how economic growth is measured. So the higher the production, of goods and services, the higher the economic growth. Okay, so primarily there are 4 types of economic growth. Just quickly on this, I don't want to go into details, but just some of the ways, pertumbuhan ekonomi, bagaimana pertumbuhan ekonomi itu boleh berlaku, The first group is called boom and bust business cycle. Apa yang maksud boom and bust? Boom tu kamu tahu kan, bust tu is just the opposite lah. Contohnya, if economic growth is high speed and inflationary, then the level of growth will become unsustainable. Terlampau tinggi inflation, juga tak berapa bagus lah walaupun economic growth is fast. So this could lead to recession. High inflation leads to recession. Much like the Great Recession 2008. Saya pernah melalui keadaan itu, and we were also affected. Ekonomi negara merudum ketika itu, and even government servants were asked to help in the sense that kita dipotong gaji sedikit. I can't remember how many percent of our salary were cut because of the condition recession ketika itu. Okay, so this type of growth is typical of business cycle lah. So ada masanya bagus, ada masanya menurun, depending on demand, depending on competition dan sebagainya. Okay, so that's a boom and bust business cycle. Jadi ini lebih agak membimbangkan. So what you can expect is that certain times economy is good, but you can expect the cycle will come back, after a period of time. Jadi the last time was 2008. I think the other did we have a cycle 2018-19? Probably because of the one MDB probably that related to that. Anyway, we had a bad economy over the past few years anyway. Ditambahkan lagi dengan COVID-19. So it kind of cycle, but almost every 10 years, this kind of business cycle booming and also busting, period. The second types of economic growth is export-led. This export-led maksudnya bergantung kepada pengeluaran dan juga pengeksporan. So the Japanese and Chinese economy have experienced export-led growth, and thanks to the high current account surplus. Jadi mereka mempunyai current account surplus yang begitu tinggi. We'll talk about current account nanti towards the end, balance of account towards the end of semester. But so this is because they have significantly more exports than import. So kalau lebih banyak ekspor, kurang import, maka ianya akan menyumbang kepada pertumbuhan ekonomi di dalam negara. So less spending on goods, but you get more through the sales of your through the export of your product. So export-led economic growth. So this is typical for countries which yang banyak mengeluarkan barang untuk ekspor. Okay, kita pun ada, tetapi we're not fully, we don't consider. I think Singapore is an example of export-led economic growth. Kita ada berkaitan dengan yang pertama, ada juga berkaitan dengan ini, ya. So it's not just one type for all lah. It could be a combination, ya. The other one is consumer. Ini lebih kepada sistem, contohnya di Amerika. Economic growth in America depends on consumer. The more money the people have, the better it is for the country. People consume, people buy goods and so on. Yeah. So the US economy is dependent on consumer spending for economic growth. Yeah. Economic growth mereka bergantung kepada if the people in the population are spending enough. Yeah. So as a result, they also have a higher current account deficit. Yeah, current account deficit. The fourth one is the commodity export, and this is countries. These countries are dependent on natural resources. Ini while the export rate tadi adalah lebih kepada manufactured goods ataupun services, tapi ini commodity export ni lebih kepada export of natural resources, seperti minyak, iron ore dan sebagainya. Right? Contohnya Saudi Arabia has had a very prosperous economy disebabkan oleh export oil mereka. They are export, ya. However, this can cause problem when the commodity prices fall. Jadi kalau harga komoditi itu merudum, suddenly fall, that will affect the economy drastically. Jadi itulah if we too dependent on that, then it can be dangerous sometimes also. Yeah. Sebab kalau tidak ada industri lain untuk membantu, to fall back on. Okay, just quickly on that one. Jadi before I go into the Professor Simon Kuznets punya six characteristic of growth process, ya. Jadi Simon Kuznets is, by the way, is an economist, and from his study he came out with some conclusions regarding the characteristics of economic growth bagi sesebuah negara. Jadi dia membuat satu assumption, ya, bahawa bagi negara yang sudah membangun terdapat ciri-ciri tertentu. Number one, ya, ciri yang pertama adalah high rates of output, high rates of growth, ya, in per capita output and population. Okay, high rates of growth in per capita output and population. Yang kedua adalah high rates of total factor productivity increase, ya, increase in total OTFP ataupun total factor productivity. Yang ketiganya adalah high rates of economic structural transformation, transformasi struktur ekonomi. And the fourth one is high rates of social and ideological transformation, transformasi dari segi ideologi dan juga social. Fifth one is the what he called the international economic outreach, and the sixth one is the spread of economic, international spread of economics being limited. Okay, so let's look briefly in each of these characteristics. Yang pertama, high rates of growth in per capita output and population. From what he observed, the gross national product of the country is estimated to have grown, of those developed countries, to have grown to as high as 40 to 50 times compared to the GNP before the 19th century. Right? So pertumbuhan ekonomi itu sangat tinggi, ya. Di GNP, Gross National Product, bertumbuh 40 hingga 50 kali ganda compared to the GNP sebelum abad ke-19. Okay? Dan the per capita output also has increased at least about 10 times that of the pre-modern era. Jadi per capita output, ya, untuk seorang, peningkatan output, in other words, that's the productivity, increase about 10 times, right? Which actually contribute to the growth, in the gross national product. Okay. And on top of that, also in terms of population has also grown at multiple 4 to 5 times. So the increase in the population also bertambah, ya, 4 hingga 5 kali ganda, 4 to 5 times compared to the before the 19th century. Okay, so increase in GNP, increase in capital output, which are related, and also increase in the number of people, growth in the population size. Contohnya, on average, between 1770 and the year 2000, countries that are now industrialized had real GNP growth of 3% per year, population growth of about 1% per year, and per capita output of about 2% per year. Right? So that is the growth, in terms of GNP, population growth, as well as the per capita output. Okay, itu yang pertama. Jadi peningkatan GNP per capita dengan populasi. Yang keduanya adalah second characteristics, ciri kedua, high rates of total factor productivity increase. Apa yang dimaksudkan dengan total factor productivity di sini adalah ianya merujuk kepada all the increase in production as a result of the output per unit of all inputs, ya. Per unit of all inputs di sini adalah termasuk capital, labor, dan teknologi, ya. So TFP here include the ideas that make both labor and capital more productive. Okay, making labor capital more productive. So much of this increase is accounted for due to the technological progress. Jadi yang menyebabkan faktor yang paling important di sini adalah penggunaan teknologi, ya, both in upgrading the physical as well as the human resources. So it represents TFP ini represents technology and accounts for about 50% to even as high as 75% of historical growth per capita in industrialized nations, industrialized economies, ya, menyumbang kepada peningkatan, ya, per capita growth, in industrialized countries. Okay, so the main thing about this is the contribution of technology, use of technology. Okay, this is another one. I think this is also based on the same graph related to the previous one. Okay, let's understand this. This is about capital accumulation, which account for only a fraction of growth, ya, hanya sebagian daripada pertumbuhan itu tadi boleh dikaitkan dengan peningkatan modal. That's what I'm saying, ya, peningkatan modal. Contoh, ya, this is if you look at the pembahagian kepada capital, ya, tadi Um, so this is the share, ya. The share of capital di sini, this is where the negative is lah, ya. Negative growth di sini. The share of growth from 4, contohnya, the 4 desal sampai ke 10 desal ni. Desal tu maksudnya 1/10 bahagian, ya. So the 4th desal, capital share-nya tinggi, ya, kalau dibandingkan dengan the total growth tadi, ya, as a result. So initial contribution adalah tinggi on the 4th desal. Tetapi selebihnya, when you come to the 10th desal, 10 ni, sebahagian besar daripada pertumbuhan itu bukan dikaitkan dengan capital share, not because of the contribution of capital, but this is a result of teknologi tadi, ya, teknologi ataupun TFP tadi, ya. So much of the difference in the growth rate in the country is contributed by the use of technology, ya, the total factor productivity. Itu saya nak tunjukkan sini lah. Okey, yang ketiga, ciri yang ketiga iaitu high rates of economic structural transformation, ya, high rate of economic structural transformation. Yang dimaksudkan di sini adalah negara yang maju telah mengubah, ya, struktur ekonominya daripada pertanian kepada perindustrian ataupun perkhidmatan, ya. Contohnya in the US in the 1870s, 1870, the proportion of labor force engaged in agriculture was 53.5%. Hampir-hampir sama dengan kita when we were in the 1990s, ya. Our population engaged in agriculture was more than 50%, yeah. So US was in 1870, yeah. So by the year 2000, this figure had declined to less than 2%. Daripada 53.5% in 1870 to only 2% of the population of US are engaged in agriculture in the year 2000. Okay? So a very drastic change in terms of the economic structure. So in other countries as well, contohnya di Europe seperti Belgium, the proportion of labor force participation or involved in agriculture in 1846 was 51%, but in 1970 it has decreased to 7% only, yeah, of the people in Belgium engaged in agriculture. Right, so that is the typical, yeah, kind of thing that happened. Ciri-ciri kedua, transformation, drastic economic structural transformation yang berlaku. Okay, so in other words, if we have to follow the same step, maka negara yang sedang membangun perlu juga mengubah struktur ekonomi, ya, daripada pertanian, particularly traditional farming to slowly into commercial and then to industrial, yeah, economy. Okay, the fourth characteristics adalah there is also high rates of social and ideological transformation as well, ya, yang bagi negara yang proses economic growth ini juga melibatkan transformasi sosial dan ideologi. Okay, yang pertama contohnya dari segi rationality, ini dari segi ideologi lah. Substituting modern methods of thinking for the traditional practices, ya, memikirkan menggunakan maklumat, menggunakan data instead of using traditional practices, ya. Tapi ini this is the difficulty. Kadang-kadang kalau kita melihat kepada orang tua kita, those who come from farming, families, for example, agriculture. Some of these farmers, actually my grandparents, my parents dulu, dia banyak bergantung kepada traditional farming, traditional practices, right? Tidak banyak menggunakan teknologi, modern methods of farming sebagainya. Okay, so that is the rationality. So decisions now, instead of depending on traditional practices, kepercayaan dan sebagainya, decision in terms of even in farming should be based on relevant facts, dengan fakta, bukannya kepada kepercayaan dan sebagainya. So that has to change, ya. Transformation dari segi rationality. And then keduanya in terms of economic planning, ya. Rationally coordinated system of policy measures that can bring and accelerate economic growth. Perlu ada economic planning. Dan kita pun ada di Malaysia. What we have now, we learn from the developed countries, of course. We have the state planning unit, we have the national planning unit ataupun economic planning unit, EPU, di peringkat nasional, dan peringkat negeri kita ada state planning unit. All this is to come out, planning unit is to come up with policies as far as to bring economic growth or to accelerate economic growth in the country. Okay, so the economic planning needs coordination between government policy as well as the private sector as well. The participation of private sector is also important, but there must be some kind of coordination ataupun coordinating body. So the economic planning unit, the state planning, economic planning unit plays that kind of role lah, sebagai badan ataupun body which coordinate the government policy and the private sector. Yeah. Yang ketiganya adalah social and economic equalization. This is to do with the promotion of more equality in status, in terms of opportunities, in terms of wealth, incomes, and levels of living. Jadi perlu ada perubahan di sini, ya, transformasi. Contohnya in terms of distribution of wealth, incomes, opportunities given to be fairly given to people who may not have the opportunity before, and also, of course, increase in the levels of living for the populations, ya, social and economic equalization, supaya tidak banyak jurang perbezaan di antara penduduk, ya, di dalam sebuah negara. Okay, so decrease the gap between the rich and the poor in the country. Okay, so all right, so that's dalam another thing with regard to the social and ideological transformation ialah improving the institutions and attitudes, yeah, needs to be changed, need to be improved. For example, increasing labor efficiency, right? Bukan saja bekerja tetapi productivity itu perlu bertambah, ya, increase labor efficiency, and also diligence, rajin bekerja, okay, jangan malas. Promote effective competition, social and economic mobility di dalam negara, right? And individual enterprise, encourage them to do that as well. Economic mobility itu maksudnya kalau dulunya terlibat dalam bidang pertanian saja, now is a time to move to other economic sectors. You can be involved in business, you can be involved in the dalam perkhidmatan dan sebagainya. You don't have to stick to a single to the previous economic sector. permit greater equality of opportunities, to the people, to be involved, make possible higher productivity, of course, kalau seboleh-bolehnya, increase productivity. That kind of attitudes untuk berubah, untuk mengubah keadaan, raise levels of living and promote development. All this comes, bukan saja dari segi physical development, tetapi juga dari segi social, your attitudes and so on must also improve, must change as well. Itu so tadi nampak perubahan dari segi attitudes toward growth, toward work and so on so forth. Institusi juga perlu berubah as well. Okay, so bagi kita menambahkan transformasi dalam bidang lain, perlu perubahan di situ. So requires changes, contohnya dari segi land tenure system, that's in terms of the institution system, ownership of land and so on. Social and economic monopolies perlu berubah, monopoly policy ekonomi. Educational and religious structures perlu berubah, and system of planning and administration. All this are required changes as well in order for country to move forward. So, okay, in the area of attitudes, ayahnya melibatkan attitude seperti efficiency, diligence, rajin, orderliness, cara bekerja, punctuality, honesty, rationality, change in orientation, integrity, self-reliance, and so on and so forth, masuk cooperation. Selalu perlu ada perubahan dari segi attitude seseorang. Okey, itu yang keempat. Yang kelima, ciri yang kelima yang disebutkan oleh Simon Kuznets adalah isu berkaitan dengan ciri yang berkaitan dengan international economic outrage. Apa dimaksudkan di sini adalah developed nations reach out to the rest of the world for two things lah. One is for inputs ataupun raw materials. Second, for them to market the product. Right. So rich nation or developed nation reach out to the rest of the world through globalization. Itu dulu for one, primary products and raw materials, and also looking for cheap labor as well. Supaya because remember labor is a very important factor of growth tadi kan. So the more labor you have, but you pay them cheap, you can produce, you can make more profit lah. And also markets for the goods, where they can export their manufactured products. Okay. So this is only made possible by increasing the power of modern technology, transportation, other communication system and all that. That helps to promote this one, mencapaikan matlamat tersebut. Okay, so so that's how they do it, going for primary products, raw materials from negara lain, even negara kita pun ada, except contohnya raw materials seperti palm oil tadi tidaklah, but they do other things, raw materials yang digunakan untuk mereka membuat barang dan manufactured goods yang dikeluarkan itu di market ataupun dijual ke negara luar. Okay, so that is the international economic outrage. All right. And then the last characteristics adalah melihat kepada how widespread is how does the economy, does it spread to the rest of the world, or is it limited? Ini yang jadi kajian KUSNET ini melihat bahawa the spread of sustained economic growth is still largely limited to the 1/3 of the world's population. In other words, are being enjoyed by people in the rich countries, rich countries. So it doesn't trickle down to the rest of the world, in other words. Okay, so for example, just 15% of the world's population enjoys a majority of the world's income. Okay, 14% world population. And then also unequal international power relation also happen between developed and underdeveloped countries, nation, menyebabkan lagi ataupun exacerbate the gap between the rich and the poor, meningkatkan lagi perbezaan ataupun jurang perbezaan di antara negara yang kaya dengan negara yang kecil. Unequal international power relations. The developed countries more dominant, and the underdeveloped countries being having less power, submissive. Okay, jadi itulah di antara ataupun the 6 characteristics of growth, economic growth according to Simon KUSNET. Ini apa yang dia lihatlah sama ada characteristic of economic growth yang telah berlaku di negara yang sudah maju. So, adakah apa yang telah dilalui oleh negara tersebut juga akan berlaku ataupun akan diikuti oleh negara yang sedang membangun ataupun yang kurang membangun? Jadi, some of this actually, by the way, the Western countries or the developed countries expect the less developed countries to follow their steps, actually. If we can do it, why can't you? That's kind of question. Tetapi sebenarnya apa yang telah dilalui oleh negara yang sudah maju agak terhad dari segi pengalaman tersebut yang boleh digunakan ataupun boleh dilakukan oleh negara yang sedang membangun sekarang ni yang ingin melalui proses pembangunan. Okay. Sebabnya adalah kerana conditions ataupun keadaan di mana mereka mula begin the economic growth adalah berlainan dengan keadaan sekarang di mana negara yang sedang membangun baru nak cuba untuk melalui proses tersebut. The conditions are different. So the 8 different differences and conditions termasuklah differences in terms of physical and human resource endowment tak sama. Kalau dulu, remember they were even looking for resources from other nations, tapi negara yang sedang membangun sekarang ni they have limited. What they have maybe ada yang telah diambil, dijual ataupun telah diambil dari negara lain. And so what they have now is very limited. And dari segi human endowment juga kurang. Anyway, let's look at that specifically later. Keduanya per capita income and level GDP and the relations to the rest of the world juga berbeza. Climate juga berbeza. Negara yang maju so happen to have or to be located in certain zones with different climates compared to the less developed countries. Population size and distributions and growth are different. Historical role of international migration also plays berbeza. International trade benefits, basic scientific and technological research and developments are different. Some are able, some are unable. Bagi negara yang sudah membangun, they have limited capabilities. and also the stability and flexibility of political and social institution juga mempengaruhi ataupun berbeza dengan keadaan semasa negara yang sudah membangun melakukan ataupun melalui proses pembangunan. Okay, right. So let's so in other words, for example, kebanyakan negara yang sudah membangun ataupun yang membangun sekarang ni, developed countries, happen to be located in the temperate regions of the world. Contohnya Europe, Amerika Syarikat, what else? Japan, but mostly Europe lah. They happen to be yang ada different climatic condition. They have summer, they have autumn, they have winter, and they have spring season. Okay, jadi different season. Why is that so? I mean, that's just the situasi lah. Jadi that happens seems to be mempunyai kaitan dengan pembangunan, ya, apa yang berlaku di negara tersebut. Contohnya dari segi agriculture, ya. And conditions, climatic condition itu, the weather and so on affects human life and so on lah. Di kebanyakan negara yang sedang membangun, yang miskin berada di kawasan equatorial regions, ya, close to the equator, keadaan panas, humid throughout the year, ya, tak ada perubahan, there's no season, ya, no season at all, tak macam negara-negara yang sudah membangun, ya. One of the reason, according to some of the mereka yang membuat kajian yang mengatakan that could contribute to the reasons why the less developed countries at a disadvantage. Sorry. And then, physical human resource tak sama, berkurangan. Per capita income, GNP, also compared to the rest of the world, negara yang sudah maju mempunyai per capita income yang tinggi, sedangkan negara yang baru nak membangun mempunyai gross national product ataupun per capita income yang sangat rendah. Ya. Okay, so and then the population size also matters, in terms of distribution and growth. Negara yang sedang membangun mempunyai populasi yang besar dan juga pertumbuhan populasi yang agak besar. So that, although we say that big population provide labor, tetapi as we can see now, just having a big population can be a disadvantage as well, right? Because you have more mouth to feed, more people to take care of. So if you don't have the means, it will be difficult, for that particular country. In some countries, for example, Nigeria and so on, the rate of population growth is probably one of the highest in the world. So that can be a difficult situation to deal with. And in terms of historical role of international migration pun berbeza. Dulu senang kalau nak migrate to another country, from poor countries to rich countries, senang, from Europe to America, very little tak ada masalah sangat, kalau nak migrate dulu. But now if you want to migrate to the rich countries, if you have the skill, if you have if you educated and having certain skill, you can, but those ordinary people will probably have difficulty to migrate to another country. Tapi dulu senang. So that is one of the reasons why the developed countries, they're taking advantage of the international migration those days. senang untuk pindah daripada sebuah negara ke negara lain, tapi sekarang tidak. International trade benefits also it seems to benefit more of the developed countries. Masa dulu mereka senang untuk menjual barang mereka ya untuk ke negara-negara lain. Okay? Tetapi negara yang sedang membangun sekarang, if you want to export your product or your goods, you are facing a lot of competition, right, from the already developed countries. Bukan itu saja, tetapi um, they put control on the goods ya untuk diimport ke negara mereka. If it is not of quality, dia tak mau. Kalau barang itu dibuat oleh pembuatan barang itu menyumbang kepada environmental problems, can be issue for them to not to import your goods and so on. Jadi trade between the developed and developing countries sekarang ini adalah tidak macam dahulu. So it was advantage to them, tak ada masalah. Tetapi sekarang ini negara yang sedang membangun menghadapi masalah untuk untuk berdagang ataupun berjual beli. So it benefits in terms of international trade ni lebih kepada negara yang sudah membangun. In terms of research and development, that one is rich country can do that because they have money to invest in research and development. But poor countries, unfortunately, because it is costly to do and carry out, so to improve your product and so on, agak susah lah. Okay, so that is the difference also between the rich countries and poor countries now, the rich countries now also. Stability and flexibility of political and social institutions. One of the factors which influence high and stable economic growth adalah political stability, as well as social institutions as well. Jadi kebanyakan negara yang sedang membangun mempunyai masalah dari segi politik, bergaduh sesama sendiri, politically, so a lot of conflicts as well, so that is also another factor. If you want to have to achieve economic growth, you need to have political stability as well. Jadi itu merupakan satu perkara yang agak unik untuk developed countries and which is different. Conditionnya adalah berbeza, yang dialami oleh atau yang sedang dialami oleh negara yang sedang membangun, yang ingin mengikut langkah negara yang sudah membangun sekarang. Okay, so if poor and rich countries have similar conditions, kalau assumption lah, andaiannya, kalau rich countries and poor countries have similar initial condition, which is not, by the way, then there would be conditional convergence in their incomes. Maksudnya negara yang kurang membangun, dia punya income per capita juga akan meningkat and reach a level where it is equivalent to those incomes of the rich countries as well. Okay, so if rich and poor countries have similar condition, then there would be conditional convergence in the incomes. In other words, developing countries would be catching up, with the developed countries. But then unfortunately, developing countries are not catching up. So what allows catching up adalah you need to do leapfrogging. You cannot follow the step-by-step process. Oops, excuse me, sekejap. Got power tadi saya off. Okay. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so leapfrogging. I'm quite sure you have heard of this one. Bukan lompat peti. Leapfrogging di sini adalah you cannot follow from step 1, step 2, and so on, ya. Ikut langkah dulu. You need to leapfrog, jump from step 1 to step 4, for example. Baru dapat mengikuti or close the gap, more or less, ya. Transfer and use of technology, ya, boleh digunakan for purpose of leapfrogging. The other is through marginal decreasing returns in capital with higher rate of accumulation of physical capital. Tapi masalahnya lah negara yang sedang membangun are lacking in capital, masalahnya. So that's one big problem. Jadi that's why developing countries are having a lot of difficulties catching up. Tetapi ada negara yang telah berjaya, okay? And many of these countries who have been successful, contohnya Singapore, has been successful. They have leapfrog, they have changed in terms of structure, the economy, and so they have achieved a status of high-income country, a developed country. Another example of poor countries before and now is already telah mencapai tahap negara membangun adalah South Korea, right? So basically, they have done this. They have done this through technology. They have done this through human capital, through structural change in the economy and so on. Okay, tapi kebanyakan negara yang belum membangun ataupun kurang membangun masih lagi ketinggalan, ya, tidak dapat mencapai tahap, ya, per capita income seperti yang didapati di negara yang sudah membangun, ya. So it is okay. I mean, you never mind if it can't really catch up, but what is more important is that there is improvement, yeah, in the developing countries in terms of the livelihood of the people as well. Okay, slowly but okay. But to catch up will be better lah, so if you can. But as I said, there's so many things, conditions. Seperti kita lihat di sini, the conditions are different, yeah, between when the developed countries were trying to develop then compared to what conditions we have, yeah, that poor countries are facing now in terms of trying to develop, trying to follow the footsteps of the rich country. Okay, so per capita income convergence ini is the idea of convergence in economics, ya, ataupun sometimes known as a catch-up effect. So ini merupakan satu hipotesis that hypothesis that poor countries, poorer economies atau poorer countries per capita income will tend to grow at faster rates than the richer countries. So as a result, all economies should eventually converge in terms of per capita income. Ini teori, dari segi how seperti yang saya kata tadi, this is how it is lah yang boleh converge tadi. Tapi in reality perkara itu agak sukar, ya, untuk dicapai, ya. So I think that's we're reaching the end of our lecture for today on the topic of economic growth and the historical growth, yeah, and economic development. Okay, so these are some of the questions which you can use, yeah, as a guide to review the topic for today. For example, what does the historical record reveal about the nature of growth process in the now developed nations, negara yang sudah maju? What relevance is the historical record, yeah, of modern economic growth for the contemporary developing nation, bagi negara yang sedang membangun? How important are the differences in initial conditions to the process of economic growth? Yeah, explain how social and institutional innovations are important for economic growth. Okay, so those are some of the apa nama tu, questions. Okay, I do have a video here to share with you. Let me try one first ya. I hope I can share that later. Sekejap ini perlu masa untuk saya melakukannya sebab kadang-kadang jadi, kadang-kadang tak jadi. Right? I have difficulty with WebEx lah. Anyway, let's try this and then we stop share the other one. Yeah. You can't see that yet. Never mind. Wait. Sekejap saya tunggu. Sekejap. Okay, sekejap. Okay, I don't know. Oh yeah, what happened when a tiny nation got filthy rich overnight? This is quite interesting. So I'm going to share this with you. But in order to do that, I need to stop sharing the first one. Okay, I'm taking off the slides, and then try to share the screen. Yeah, let me set that back. Okay, this one. Okay, can you see the screen now?
Yes.
Boleh nampak gambar Trump Okay, all right, good. Let's try the voice ataupun suara dulu.
And African nations as S-hole countries.
No, I didn't mean to offend anyone. I'm rather stating the fact.
Sorry.
Moreover,
can you hear just now?
Yes, Prof.
Suara dapat. Okay, then it works lah. Okay, so let's watch this one, yeah. Some of this first one is just some advertisement and all that. Yeah?
this island nation was considered the wealthiest nation on Earth only a few decades ago. By 2017, it has become one of the poorest countries where no one wants to live, not even refugees. The story of how this place went from rags
Okay, kita start mula tadi.
of shit.
President Trump referred to Haiti and African nations as S-hole countries.
No, I didn't mean to offend anyone. I'm rather stating the fact. Moreover, this island nation was considered the wealthiest nation on Earth only a few decades ago. By 2017, it has become one of the poorest countries where no one wants to live, not even refugees. The story of how this place went from rags to riches and back to rags again is not only interesting, but gives some important lessons too. With only 21 square kilometers of land area, somewhat the size of LA International Airport, Nauru is the smallest state in the South Pacific and the third smallest state in the world after Vatican City and Monaco. It's a home to some 11,000 people, but long before humans discovered the island, local bird species used this island as their restroom and excreted their poop here for millions of years. The bird droppings, also called guano, eventually formed rich phosphate deposits that covered most of the island. For those who don't know, phosphates are the key ingredient in agricultural fertilizers, and its limited deposits are mined all around the world. So basically, Nauru was sitting on top of excrement gold, and Germans were the first to find out. They started mining this resource in 1906 under the name of Pacific Phosphate Company. Following World War I, mining continued under the British Phosphate Commission when Nauru fell in the hands of Britain, Australia, and New Zealand. Things remained more or less the same until World War II, and this is where things started to change. Nauru got independence in 1968, bought the British Phosphate Commission, and instead of fixing the damage done, it went on a full-on crazy mining streak under the locally owned Nauru Phosphate Corporation. The people of Nauru mined a lot, so much so that Nauru became one of the richest countries in a mere decade. The extent of rapacious mining can be understood by this dystopian-looking hellscape of jagged limestone pinnacle up to 15 meters high that formed when the phosphate was carved out of the ground. To load phosphate onto ships for export, Nauru built these gigantic iron structures on its shores which now lie useless. In 1975, the country earned the equivalent of $2.5 billion for a population of mere 7,000, more than enough to keep them satisfied for generations to come. Per capita income of Nauru reached the second highest in the world, only after the oil heaven Kuwait. So what did the Nauruans do with so much money? Did they make some long-term investments that would allow them to sustain their future lives on this tiny, barren, and desolate island after resources are gone? Nope, they had better ideas. With their newfound wealth, people in Nauru bought cars and houses. The country built a hotel, a golf course, and founded an airline so that it could import Western food. The government created a Nauru Trust to reinvest the spare wealth, but mismanagement, corruption, and ignorance resulted in bad investments in vanity projects around the globe. Nauru House in Melbourne, Nauru Tower in Hawaii, Pacific Star Hotel in Guam, Pacific House in Washington, the Grand Pacific Hotel in Fiji, 3 Chesham Street in London, just to name a few. Officials were spending money on luxury trips in the name of managing the real estate portfolio. At some point, Nauru got the nickname of Kuwait of the Pacific because of how the citizens and government officials flaunted money as if it were endless. Time took a turn. The island's phosphate resources depleted, but the country's expenditure remained the same, and Nauru started borrowing money from other countries. One of the advisors convinced the president to invest in a London-based musical pop band named Unit 4+2. The show closed only a few weeks after its debut, costing Nauruans more than $7 million in today's money. With no source of income to pay off its debts, international creditors seized Nauru's entire real estate portfolio together with its sole aircraft of Air Nauru. Nauru Trust went bankrupt, virtually bankrupting the entire nation. All Nauru was left with was overexploited barren lands where nothing could be grown, polluted shores where no aquatic animal would visit, and a population of some 7,000 people to feed. The story doesn't end here, it just gets a bit crazier. As a desperate attempt to generate income, Nauru published ads on the internet offering anyone with $20,000 the opportunity to open a bank on the island. The Russian mafia saw an opportunity to seize and used Nauru's liberal banking policies to launder over $70 billion from the former Soviet Union. At one point, Nauru used its position as a member of the United Nations to recognize independent countries like Kosovo and Abkhazia, allegedly for money. Russia was reported to give Nauru $50 million in humanitarian aid for this act. Nauru government, however, claimed these two things were not linked. In 2001, Nauru became a refugee detention center when the Australian government agreed to pay Nauru for temporarily housing refugees that were reaching Australia for asylum. Hundreds of men, women, and children were sent to these offshore processing centers where it was later reported that conditions were wretched, akin to torture, and refugees were treated like criminals. Some compared the conditions in these camps to those at Guantanamo Bay. The Nauru camp shut down in 2008 and reopened again in 2012 with minor additions, but the conditions did not improve. This time, the Australian and Nauruan governments tried to keep things secret by limiting access to the island and punishing those who would speak out about the conditions inside the camps. An Iranian refugee in 2016 lit himself on fire after he learned that he would be expected to live on the island for the next 10 years. Talking about today's Nauru, 70% of the island is now inhabitable. In absence of farming, people are forced to consume only low-quality imported food in cans, which has greatly contributed to the decline of the health on the island. According to the BMI scale, Nauruans are the most overweight people in the world, with 97% of men and 93% of women being overweight or obese. Nauru has the world's highest level of type 2 diabetes, with more than 40% of the population affected. Kidney and heart-related diseases are common on the island. 90% of Nauruans are unemployed living on government support. The school system has almost collapsed and detention centers are still operating. It demonstrates how unsustainable exploitation of resources out of greed can put us in situations we may never come out of.
Okay. All right, let's stop that. Okay, so a short video. Okay, hold on. A short video. Stop sharing, that'll be better. Okay. Regarding an example of a third world country, but this one is a small, very, very small country, an island, Nauru, island of Nauru, rich in deposits, guano. Now, the guano deposit took millions of years, accumulated on the island and become a very important source of fertilizer lah. Jadi, fortunately, the people, for example, the British and all that, are taking advantage. Yeah, they discovered. They mining the guano and all that. Yeah, and guano tu yang masih kira masih fresh lagi dah. Once it become deposit, dia jadi macam jadi batu and all that, and then you have to mine it, and then that becomes the the rich fertilizer, potassium and all that. So as you can see from there, this is where things were very, very promising in the beginning, but turns out to be bad towards the end. Yeah, sekarang ni, one time Nauru was a very prosperous island, with lots of money and so on from the export of fertilizer, and unfortunately, the money earned from that was not invested or reinvested for development, for some other development in the country. Selepas habis the mining, nanti tak ada apa lagi, barren, so now the country is poor lah, poor, but one time it was very rich. But this is an issue of exploitation by foreign investors, who bring back the income from the mining of the guana tadi, untuk membeli barang, untuk membeli kereta, untuk membeli apa-apa sajalah, but not reinvested for development. This is satu issue. That's the thing that I wanted to share with you. Jadi we talk about capital accumulation. They do have capital with the sales of the fertilizer. Unfortunately, it was not reinvested for development purposes. Okay, jadi itu saja. Any question? Ada soalan? Saya tutupkan recording sekejap.